So one of the first things we want to do when thinking about climate change is work out, what are we pumping into the atmosphere? What is it that we are most responsible for? And what are the areas that we want to most focus on? The way we do that in climate change is we think about different categories of emissions. So in the middle there, we've got what we call Scope 1 emissions. These are the direct emissions that come from our businesses or our organisations or our institutions. So for example, PwC on this call will have direct emissions from their company-owned vehicles. But actually PwC won't have that many other direct emissions. Whereas, for example, a coal-fired power plant, the direct emissions of that will be the coal that is burned, releasing carbon dioxide and some other emissions into the atmosphere. For many businesses, a bigger issue is not just your direct emissions, but your indirect emissions. And there are two different categories of indirect emissions. Scope 2 indirect emissions, which you'll see in the red there, they are our use of electricity, energy, or other heat and steam sources. So these are indirect. If you, in your business premise right now, turn on the electricity, you do not emit anything from your premises, but you have control over that switch. And that's why they get a special category. So this is called Scope 2 emissions. And finally, Scope 3 emissions are the biggest category for most of indirect emissions. And this is the emissions that are upstream, so in our supply chain, or in business travel, or in employee commuting, as well as downstream, so in the use of our products, or the end-of-life treatment of our products, or for a company like PwC perhaps, or a bank company like NatWest Group, for the financing of different projects that we do, or the consulting of different projects. And I think it's important to think about these three scopes as we think about our own businesses and where we should most focus our energy. For example, if a large bank reduced their direct emissions, Scope 1 emissions to zero, that would be great, and we want them to do that. But actually, they're probably going to have greater influence and impact by working on their, for example, investments or financed emissions. And helping the companies they are investing or financing reduce those. So we have to think carefully about where we can get the biggest impact from what we do. And I want you to think about two little words, and those words are of and on. So on the left there, you've got the impact of climate change on business. We're thinking here of extreme weather, sea level rise, drought, flooding. And on the right, you've got the impact of business on climate change. We're thinking of building and building standards, deforestation, pipelines, etc. It clarifies positions, and that's because what is happening here is that sometimes people are talking about the impact of climate change, sometimes people are talking about the impact on climate change, and we're missing the discussion. We don't realize we're talking about different things. The impact of climate change and the impact of climate change on business, and the impact of business on climate change. The negative impact of business on climate change is your contribution to the crisis, and you are contributing to the crisis. But the positive is your contribution to the solution, and you can contribute to the solution.
Why do we need healthy oceans? So, first of all, the oceans, we know they produce roughly 50% of the oxygen that we breathe is produced by the oceans. The ocean is really important to capture the carbon that we emit in our atmosphere, and it can capture up to 25% of this carbon. Then it will sequester this carbon by flowing it in the deep waters and keeping it for hundreds of thousands of years. So it's really important to keep this balance. And it's the same with the excess heat. So all the excess heat that we inject in our planet, most of it is captured by the ocean, which has far more heat capacity. So it can keep more heat than the atmosphere. So most of this heat will tend to go to the ocean. We'll have stronger cyclones if the ocean is warmer. A warmer ocean can as well affect monsoons and all the rains, which will have effects on droughts and floods. And also, obviously, a warm ocean takes more space, is less dense, so this has an obvious effect on a global sea level rise. So what can we do? What are the opportunities for us and for the businesses? So first of all, we need to talk at the government level. So we need to be engaged with COP26, G7, the Paris Agreement. Then on an individual levels, we have what we call the 4Rs, so recycle, reduce, renew, and rethink. So the biggest challenge is that we need to reduce our use and dependence on fossil fuels.
The next 2 years to 2023, as we emerge from the pandemic, our view and our vision for this city is very much to get Southampton moving, to create the energy, the belief, the dynamism, to unlock the potential, as we've, the heading of this seminar this morning, to really believe, because if we do not change our thinking, nothing is going to change. We already have a series of green plans that are here in the city. We'll be continuing those. One of those is to deliver the council being net carbon zero by 2030. Our job is an enabler. It's to stimulate, it's to encourage, it's to drive, it's to be at the forefront in creating this environment. And so my big question to all of us is, how can we take this ambition and this vision and this drive and this want, using the resources we have, making ourselves as Southampton the pioneer and the leader in it, and unlocking the potential that we have in our hearts, in our minds, in our belief, in our capabilities to do things.